That teacher was expelled from the school for helping beat up a student.
I don't feel so good.
His name is Thor, and he is the most powerful support mage in history, even though he was part of the group that defeated the Demon King. After 10 years, he was treated like trash, and he never managed to rise in rank as a teacher at Velen's school. That is because support magic is unpopular among mages, since it only serves to babysit and take care of others. That year, a single student enrolled in his class, and she was one of the most beautiful girls in the school. The bully, who was the school's prodigy, kept tormenting her, so they would date. So the teacher had to intervene. The boy calling Professor Thor trash, useless, and a freeloader was going to hit him, but the girl intervened and invited the teacher to form a group and defeat them in a magic battle. If she lost, she would marry the idiot, but if they won, he could no longer bother Professor Thor. On the day of the duel, the girl would be attacking and the professor responsible for the buffs. When the battle began, the spell was cast. The buff was so strong that even the girl felt the absurd difference immediately. She already knew that that professor's magic was not normal. Soon he applied a slowing debuff on the opposing students. The boy in response launched a huge fireball. Then Thor conjured a water element buff on his student Reyna's sword. Then with a single slash, she was able to completely extinguish the fire. Advancing with everything, the battle was already over. The so-called school prodigy lost. Those who witnessed it said they had no idea Reyna was that strong. But the truth was behind it. The problem was that the school principal was watching everything, and he did not have a very friendly expression. Not long after he was in the principal's office, the man who in turn was calm, soon looked like a furious chihuahua foaming at the mouth, and simply said that Thor was fired. Not being satisfied, he questions the reason, especially because he himself had already reported the incident the other day. But the principal says that they can no longer allocate budget for support magic, and clearly says that they do not need a salary thief who is good for nothing. Still, the academy had more than enough money to keep running, so Thor knew the headmaster was just making excuses to get rid of him. Gibbild's father was a sponsor of the school, and the conflict the main guy got involved in could have cost them money. Even when the mage reminds the headmaster about the student's bad behavior, the headmaster angrily tells him to shut up. He believes Velen Academy would never grow if they kept clinging to his predecessor's ideals, so they need more funds, equipment, staff, and prestige. Thor asks if the way each student is treated depends on how much money they have. The headmaster ignores the jab, making it clear Thor was fired and had to leave immediately. Even when the mage tries to make one last request, he's ignored and thrown out of the office. Walking down the halls feeling defeated, Thor runs into Reyna. The girl thanks him for the help he gave her the other day, and the main guy says it's fine. Taking the chance to tell her about getting fired, the student is shocked and worries it was her fault. But Thor explains he'd been thinking about leaving for a long time. He thanks Reyna for always showing up to his classes, and hopes he was able to help her in some way, since there'd be no reason to stay at the academy if the main guy left. The mage decides she'll drop out too, but Thor scolds her for making that decision, since it would affect her promising future. The teacher knows how talented she is, so she should graduate before she ends up a failure like him. Reyna gets embarrassed when Thor steps closer, then explains she wouldn't have any problem leaving school because she'd earned enough credits to do it. The main guy is impressed, since the student was only in her second year. Meanwhile, he figures Reyna would be fine without him because she can learn fast. In the end, the girl decides she won't try to stop him anymore, and leaves. Meanwhile, Thor wonders if the support magic he taught would be useful to her, even if just a little. The next day, he grabs his suitcase to leave the academy, but he knows he doesn't have anywhere to go and will be out of money soon. All of a sudden, Reyna shows up, and here's the main guy considering the idea of traveling the world like he used to. Then the student hands him an envelope, asking him to go to the imperial capital and give it to the palace guards. Reyna was close to someone who respects Thor, so it would be a good idea to go see her, and that way he could get a new job. Grateful, the main guy takes the envelope and says goodbye to his student. Meanwhile, the girl smiles, excited to see him again in the future. A few days pass, and Thor arrives in the royal capital, meeting Emperor Heinrich. Just like Reyna said, he handed over the letter he got, and everyone in the castle treated him really well, which left him confused. Thor doesn't understand why he's getting such special treatment and wonders who Reyna's friend could be. Later, he's called in to meet Emperor Heinrich. The ruler says they would never forget how Thor and his team saved the world when they defeated the Demon Lord. Nervous, the main guy says he just did what anyone would have done in his place. The humility in his answer makes the Emperor laugh, and he tells the main guy he can have whatever he wants as a reward. So Thor says he got a letter from Reyna, worried they might be misunderstanding something. Right away, a female voice replies that he's being treated the way he deserves, after they receive the student's letter. That was Elena von Neustadt, princess and Reyna's friend. Realizing that, Thor bows and asks for forgiveness, since he never imagined the two girls were close. Elena laughs at the over-the-top reaction and suggests showing Thor his new room. On top of that, the princess is willing to answer any questions he has. With the Emperor's permission, the two of them head to another room to talk. Thor tries to make conversation, but he has a hard time being casual with the princess. To calm him down, Elena explains that he once saved her, and ever since then she's respected him a lot. The princess wanted to show him around over the next few days, but she was way too busy to do it. That much kindness makes Thor worry he won't live up to such high expectations. So Elena says she'd always heard Reyna praising the lesson she got from him. Remembering his former student, Thor is moved and cries tears of joy. That reaction makes the princess laugh, and then she suggests the protagonist become a court mage. That way, he'd use his magic to solve the Empire's problems in exchange for meals, a house, and a proper salary. Elena offers 100 gold coins a month and was willing to pay in advance. shocking Thor with how much he'd be rewarded. Naturally, he worries about what kind of work he'd have to do, and in response the princess says she wanted him to marry her. Confused, the protagonist doesn't know what to say. Later, even though he thinks the marriage proposal was a tasteless joke, Thor didn't plan on turning down the job at the court mages. When he goes to his new room, he finds Reyna waiting for him in the hallway. Thor is surprised to see her but then realizes the girl decided to leave the academy. The mage explains she'd gotten good grades and didn't see the point in studying without the protagonist as her teacher. Touched, he thanks her because he got a new job thanks to the recommendation letter. Reyna says it'll be fine and promises she'll support him in every job. After all, she was a court mage too, and explains she went to the academy to sharpen her own skills. That's why Reyna was ready to support him from then on as his assistant. The protagonist asks what they'd have to do and the mage explains it could literally be anything. It doesn't even sound like real work, and Reyna quickly blames the princess. The mages serve the royal family and are led by Elena. Even though they rarely get orders in the end, they could just sit around until they're given something to do. Reyna suggests Thor go with her to greet the commander of the court mages. The two head to the office and ask permission to come in, and they're received by Baden Zaxberg. The mage introduces the newbie, leaving the acting commander confused since he hadn't heard anything about it. He's never seen Reyna either, but confirms she's part of the team when he sees the crest on her clothes. Baden asks who hired that scruffy-looking man, and Reyna says it was the princess, so she wanted to greet the division commander. He was in charge of evaluating rookies. While the real leader was away on a job, Reyna needles him for not following the princess's orders, making Baden furious. The acting commander argues that accepting just anyone could hurt the court's reputation. The mage shoots back that disobeying Elena could be seen as treason against the crown and decides to leave Baden. Yells angrily that Thor looked useless, but he'd give him a chance to prove his worth. But when the protagonist says he was good with magic, the acting commander laughs out loud, even though he's being treated badly. The guy asks for a chance to show what he can do. If he isn't worthy of being on the team, then he'll leave without complaining. Giving into all that insistence, Baden says Thor should take the hiring exam. Thor is happy and thanks him, bowing in respect. About an hour later, all the exam participants were gathered in the courtyard. Among them was Gibald, Baden's son, totally convinced he'd get into the court mages. When the boy sees Thor, he freezes in surprise and even starts shaking with fear. He runs desperately into his father's arms when he sees Reyna's scary face, losing all motivation to take the exam. Furious, Baden asks what the protagonist did to leave Gibald like that. Thor answers that they only had a small duel at the academy. Finally, the test begins, and Baden makes it clear he'd be testing the protagonist personally. The court mages use each person's specialty to handle certain jobs. Since Thor was good at support magic, the acting commander calls for Velgar, a knight of the order. The protagonist would team up with a rookie swordswoman named Mia to face Velgar and Baden. Reyna is against the idea because the fight would be pretty unfair, and the acting commander snaps back that winning wasn't required. With a sigh, Thor greets the rookie knight, and Reyna quickly gives a short rundown on the girl. Mia was a baron's daughter, had only recently become an E-rank knight, and was good with her shield, but she could be fired at any moment. Thor scolds Reyna for being so rude, and the knight says it's fine because everything that was said was true. Compared to her, Velgar was the strongest in the division alongside the commander of the court mages, so Mia would understand if she got fired. After all, she was useless next to her skilled co-workers, and might even get in the way during the duel. With that, Reyna comforts the girl, making it clear they'd win with Thor as an ally. The protagonist agrees, assuring they'd pass the exam as long as they put in the effort. Meanwhile, Badan yells at his cowardly son, trying to make him stop shaking whenever he looked at Reyna. The stand-in explains that Gibald would face the pathetic mage and the rookie knight alongside Velgar, so there was no way he could lose. After that, the son regains his confidence, and Velgar takes the chance to look over his opponents. Even though the veteran could see Mia had potential, he knew he couldn't let his guard down around Thor. A little later, Badan starts the duel, explaining that either side could surrender if they wanted. Reyna thinks about how Velgar was pretty famous for defeating 2 dragons, creatures considered the most powerful in this world, so this was a worthy opponent. And even Badan was confident the knight would make his son win. Gibald gets ready to cast a fire spell, and Thor tells his partner to let him handle it. The protagonist slows down the opponent's casting and disperses it, shocking Gibald. Then Velgar charges at them, and Thor decides he'll boost Mia's defenses instead of weakening the knight. The girl panics when she sees the veteran's sword hit her shield, but she's amazed she managed to block the attack. Thor knows she wouldn't last long on her own, so he decides to take down Gibald first by firing off a quick light spell. The boy drops to the ground defeated, and Badan shouts for the exam to be called off. But Reyna stops him from speaking using magic, letting the battle continue. Meanwhile, the protagonist is impressed by how fast Velgar is, dispersing a spell before it's even cast. Realizing he wouldn't be able to weaken the warrior, the mage strengthens Mia so they can attack their opponent. Before the swords clash, Thor increases the gravity on his ally's blade, making it harder for Velgar to defend. The knight doesn't hesitate, he slips past Mia, closing in on the protagonist to take him down. But his sword crashes into an iron barrier, snapping his blade. At that moment, Velgar is sure Thor is someone extraordinary and surrenders. He also helps Mia back up and praises her for pushing herself in the duel. As soon as the knights leave, Reyna walks up to the protagonist and congratulates him on the win. But Badan quickly blurts out that the exam still isn't over, making it clear there'd be another match. Since he refuses to acknowledge him unless he follows his orders, Thor gives in to the demand. Even though Reyna doesn't like it, the protagonist makes it clear he wants to test his own powers too and find out if he's worthy of being a court mage. A little later, his new opponent arrives on the battlefield. She was Luna, the daughter of the real commander of the Mages division, even though she didn't respect him as such. And since Thor didn't look like a strong opponent, the girl was bored. Badan replies that this was a trivial opponent and would at least entertain her a little. To him, Luna was an annoying brat, but her skill with magic made her part of the court's elite. This was Badan's chance to get rid of her and Thor at the same time. Meanwhile, the girl goes over to greet the protagonist, surprised when he recognizes her as the test's new examiner. Thor explains he can sense in her the experience of a good mage, which makes Luna feel all smug. Reina demands that the girl introduce herself properly and be polite if she wants to be seen as mature. The two of them almost start arguing, so Thor asks them to calm down. With that, Luna decides to let the assistant's jab slide out of respect for the protagonist. She explains that the next phase of the test would be facing her, and the battle would end when one of their spells hit the other. The two mages step into the arena and get ready, but Thor fires off an attack so fast Luna barely has time to see it before she's hit dead on. Reina announces the end of the match, making the mage furious. She demands another round since she'd let her guard down. Badan comes to Luna's defense and Thor agrees he wouldn't want to pass the test unfairly. So the match is redone, and the two mages get ready to attack at the same time. Thor knows Luna will be just as hard to beat as Velgar, since he can't weaken her. Her offensive techniques across multiple elements prove the girl's huge talent, reminding the protagonist of an old friend. That friend learned magic alongside Thor, and quickly surpassed him. It didn't take long for the protagonist to get frustrated and jealous, afraid of what would happen if they ever faced a threat in the future. So he studied so he wouldn't be a burden to the team and refined his support magic. But in the end, what he managed to pull off wasn't something he was proud of. Thor scolds himself for getting lost in memories, and realizes Luna was frustrated because her opponent was reading every one of her attacks. Because of that hesitation, she gave the protagonist the chance to beat her just by catching her off guard with a simple wind spell. Reina announced the end of the match, making Luna realize she'd been defeated because of a blind spot. On the other hand, Thor was relieved he'd won by using his battle experience. His opponent would have crushed him if it were a contest of strength. When everyone's attention focuses on the two mages, Bane takes the chance to cast a spell above Luna. Thor was the first to notice something was off, and runs to the girl, telling her to drop what she was holding. Even though she's confused, Luna does what he said and lets go of her staff, watching it get destroyed by Bane's spell while the protagonist pulls her to safety. He checks if the girl is okay, making her embarrassed because she'd been held in his arms for so long. Once she's put down, Luna makes it clear she'll beat Thor next time and runs off. Even after all that, Bane refuses to acknowledge the protagonist. All of a sudden, a group of knights shows up to arrest the acting commander under an imperial order. He was accused of stealing public money, meddling with the Magic Academy, and abusing his authority, so he'd be put on trial by Heinrich. Everyone else watches Bane get dragged away by the knights, feeling awful about it. With that, Reina drops the subject to celebrate Thor's victory in the exam. He passed the test successfully and earned the qualification he needed to be on the team, making Thor's assistant proud. Later, the protagonist went back to his room and lay down to rest a bit. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door and asks permission to come in. It's Elena, apologizing for Baden's rude behavior. Shocked by the visit, the protagonist rushes out to greet her on his knees. The princess is startled by that reaction, and Thor quickly invites her to sit. The two talk about the entrance exam, with the protagonist saying he's impressed by how much talent he ran into. Elena had been watching the fights from afar and was delighted by his performance in the arena. The compliment makes Thor nervous, feeling embarrassed over something so simple. The princess asks the mage not to be so modest and to acknowledge his own skills too. Soon she decides to leave so she won't bother him, and tells him to rely on Reina if he needs anything. After all, she personally volunteered to help Thor with whatever he needed. When Elena leaves, the protagonist cries a little, moved by how much Reina valued him as a teacher. He gets worried when he remembers the princess's proposal that they get married, and realizes too late he was so distracted he didn't even notice Reina coming into the room to talk. The assistant wanted to celebrate his win, so she brought a homemade cake. The two sit down to eat, and in that moment Thor recognizes the kindness of his former student. At the same time, he thinks Reina will stop putting him on a pedestal once they work together. Maybe she'll even realize the protagonist isn't as good as he seems from far away. That gets him down, and Thor promises his assistant he'll work hard at the job. In response, Reina says she already thinks he does enough, which moves him again. At night, Elena finishes the day's tasks and gets told by a servant that it's time to sleep. Even so, she grabs a notebook to draw Thor praising her old teacher while writing a diary entry about him. Part of her even got jealous when she saw him holding Luna in his arms. The princess wonders who Thor would choose between Elena and Luna, even though she knew they were the same person. Her biggest wish was to make him find the happiness he deserved, and of course she'd love to marry him, so she was going to work hard to win him over. The next day, people gossip about Thor having defeated Velgar. It was annoying, but he wanted to believe his reputation would get better in the future. So the protagonist asks Reina to help him find some work to do. He was anxious about just sitting around, and he feels useless. Reina laughs at her former professor and tells him about a notice board where they can pick up requests to handle the Mage's Court, and the Royal Guard can get tasks that adventurers couldn't solve. In general, they were hard or boring missions that weren't worth the low rewards. Some looked urgent, and Thor gets interested in one from a distant village. In recent years, the crops had been getting poisoned, but there hadn't been any major harm to the people. The protagonist decides to check out the village and help those people. Some people at court gossip that Thor won't succeed on that mission, which annoys Reina. But Thor asks him not to worry about it, preferring to avoid picking a fight. 2 hours later, the pair of mages arrives at the village, warmly welcomed by the townspeople. The village chief, Graba, thanks them for accepting the request, and leads the two to the poisoned fields. Graba says it wasn't a problem caused by wind, water, or soil. Some villagers believe they offended the sacred tree, so they prayed to it every day asking for forgiveness. Thor is impressed to see that the tree was healthy despite the poison spread around it. Even feeling the pressure of Graba and Reyna's expectations, the protagonist tries to purify the fields. At first, the poison disappears, but it comes back a few seconds later. With that, the group discovers that the source of the contamination was the sacred tree. Graba says that tree was a spiritual symbol with over 2,000 years of life. Even officials who investigated it didn't find anything suspicious, so the protagonist asks permission to approach the tree and use a spell to get rid of the poison. With the village chief's consent, Thor uses a spell that at first doesn't seem to cause any reaction. Suddenly, a root bursts out of the ground and the tree trunk starts twisting and growing, revealing it's a treant. It was a monster born after a dryad possesses a body, and the creature's strength depends on its vessel. But Thor had never seen a treant this huge. When a battle is about to start, he makes Graba run back to the village with acceleration magic. He tells Reyna to fall back, but the girl was ready to fight and backed him up. Thor knows it'd be better to have her at his side, because facing the treant would make this mission turn into S rank. The mage charges at the poisoned roots and cuts them with her sword. Meanwhile, the protagonist tries to slow the treant down. The assistant's reflexes were incredible and made Thor feel nostalgic for some reason. Reyna was going to close in on the main body while getting support from the mage. Soon, the treant's branches start moving like arms and get in the swordswoman's way. They were hard to cut, so the protagonist reinforces Reyna's blade with fire. That way the girl manages to destroy the creature's roots and branches. When they least expect it, the pair realizes the treant was using water to put out the fire. The monster was pretty smart, so the protagonist decides they'd use a different strategy. Instead of asking too many questions, Reyna trusts her former teacher and gets ready to attack again. She rushes the roots, taking advantage of the fact they were slower. Thor wonders if the treant was laughing at them because it was underestimating them. As soon as the creature starts using water to put out the fire, Thor switches the enchantment on Reyna's sword to ice. Even for a master mage, swapping elements in an enchantment that fast was really hard. That's why Reyna was pretty proud to have the protagonist by her side in the fight. Successfully, she manages to freeze the treant's water, also stopping its movements. Next, the ice turns into fire again, letting it burn the tree all the way to the core. Reyna knew she wouldn't have been able to defeat the monster alone, and once again she's amazed by Thor's support magic. At the end of the battle, the protagonist drops to the ground sitting down, exhausted, and praises his assistant for working so hard. A little later, the villagers show up to celebrate the monster's defeat. Reyna tries to give all the credit to Thor, but he refuses to take the praise. Then Thor apologizes to Graba for having to destroy the sacred tree, but the village chief says it's fine. Relieved that everything's been taken care of, the villagers join together to finish the job, cutting up what's left of the tree to keep the fire from spreading. Graba feels bad for not being able to offer a proper reward to the mages, so they hand over a few sacks of ash and charcoal, rare and valuable materials in the capital. The village had enough materials to get by, so they don't mind gifting that much. Getting an idea, Thor asks them to let him use the sacred tree's ashes to cast a spell on the crops. He wanted to help the village using his biggest specialty, which was nature magic. Since that sacred tree had been watching over the people for 2,000 years, Thor believes it had been fighting the Triad's domination for a long time. In the end, it really was trying to protect them, which only makes the villagers feel even more blessed. Later, the mages leave and the villagers praise the work they'd done. Suddenly, Graba gets the news that the crops enchanted with the sacred tree's ashes were growing rapidly. Everyone is amazed, believing it was a miracle. On the way back home, Reyna feels bad for having received all the credit for the work. After all, her plan as a princess was to make Thor's reputation improve. All of a sudden, the protagonist apologizes for making her work so much. He was worried because the assistant had seemed down since they did the mission, and Reyna is happy. Thor noticed that when the mage says she's tired, the protagonist immediately eases her fatigue with magic. Reyna knows it wouldn't take long for Thor's powers to be recognized, making him a lord. That way the princess would have the perfect excuse to make him marry her. Meanwhile, in a dungeon, Mia was struggling in a fight and fears she might die there. The next day, the protagonist went to work yawning while Reyna was full of energy like usual. 5 minutes later, she was sighing too after being dismissed by Thor. Walking through the halls, she notices the guy was heading to the Royal Guard headquarters and follows him. Thor had gone to check the day's mission board and finds out it was empty. According to others at headquarters, a lot of people want to impress Elena, so they try to work extra hard. Some were dumb enough to believe they could even ask for her hand in marriage, which reminds Thor of the request the princess made of him before. In the middle of the conversation, one of the knights comments that Luna has been working really hard. She was known as a genius, but she was frustrated about losing to a newbie like the protagonist. Ignoring that, Thor wonders what he'll do during the day, since there were no missions available. Then, the knights talk about Mia and her captain Boldus having gone to a rank C dungeon. The protagonist asks for details about it because he owed the newbie one. He hopes he's worrying over nothing, but decides to go check anyway. Boldus led a team into the dungeon even though he was inexperienced, putting everyone in potential danger. Even though it's a mission the guild would handle, knights would have a hard time finishing it because 20 adventurers have already died in it. After getting the information, Thor heads toward the dungeon at high speed using support magic. There were fortresses certain monsters create, guarding the dungeon core there and placing it somewhere inconvenient. the core would keep summoning monsters from the demon realm until it's destroyed by a knight or adventurer. The ranks for each were basic and usually didn't cause problems. Soon, the protagonist arrives at the village near the dungeon, realizing the residents must have evacuated. As he gets closer to the entrance, he feels like he's being followed, and uses his magic to see who it is. Thor realizes it's Reyna, who was following him probably because she wanted to report what was happening to the princess. That worries him. After all, there was a chance he'd get fired if he failed at the job, so the protagonist steals himself and runs to the dungeon. Ignoring Reyna's complaint that he's way too fast to keep up with, the entrance to the dungeon is inside an abandoned mine. Thor prepares for the chance its rank might suddenly change, since that wasn't uncommon. Using magical sight, he finds traces of mana and signs of old battles. Soon, the mage runs into several living suits of armor and wonders if the knights left them behind on purpose. That was a monster that takes over a dead vessel, making a zombie and making it hard to defeat. So unless you exorcise the spirit, the creature would just keep coming back. Then Thor stopped the armor's movements before using holy magic to defeat them. After that, he keeps searching for Mia's team. Reyna, who watched everything, is impressed again by her former teacher's skill for knowing holy magic. The girl keeps admiring him from a distance and knows he can handle that dungeon on his own. Along the way, Thor wonders if Mia's team abandoned the fight and ran, leaving so many monsters behind. Spirits weren't visible to the naked eye, so someone who could use visibility magic was essential. Meanwhile, a group of knights was having trouble defeating the living armors. They all shout in desperation and argue with each other, frustrated with the situation. Boldus simply ran off, leaving his teammates behind, and Thor decides to deal with it right away. He exorcises all the monsters with a single motion and eases everyone's fatigue. One of the mages says Mia stayed behind to buy time, and the protagonist runs to find her. Part of him wanted to believe the newbie was fine after all. She was good at defending with shields. At the same time, Mia keeps struggling to face her opponents. The spirit's attacks weren't visible, and there was no mage to help them. She was getting exhausted and worries that she might die there. Fear makes the girl start crying. Then a familiar voice tells her to dodge an attack coming from behind. The knight does as she's told, and has her fatigue healed by Thor's magic, getting surprised when the spirits suddenly become visible. The protagonist asks them to leave it in his hands, while the knights neutralize the armor attacks. The group works as a team and starts defeating each of the monsters. By the time Reyna managed to reach them, the fight was already over. Thor praises the rookie for pushing through on her own, up to now. Even though the girl is grateful for being saved, she asks why the protagonist is there. He explains he was worried about Mia, which makes her feel embarrassed and touched. On the other hand, Thor doesn't notice, and just checks to make sure she isn't hurt. Reyna watches the scene and sighs in relief that she didn't have to help, deciding to leave. Suddenly, the protagonist notices bits of ash moving under the knight's feet, and warns her to get ready for another fight. The ashes go into a hole in the wall, probably feeding another monster. Thor is sure they're about to run into the dungeon boss. Shocked, Mia realizes they're about to face a Death Eater, a monster way too strong for a rank C dungeon. She thinks she can create an opening so they can escape, and Thor is impressed by how hard she's trying to stay calm. The protagonist points out that the dungeon core is at the back of the room so they can't run. With some effort, Mia blocks the Death Eater's heavy attack, making the monster back off. Thor explains that leaving the dungeon boss now would mean more people die and get eaten, making the creatures stronger. He believes they can win if they work together, and the girl decides to trust the mage and take orders from him. So Thor says they need to get rid of the Death Eater's cloak first, since it's resistant to magic and physical attacks. Since the knight is confident in her stamina, she gets a speed boost with magic to lure the creature in. When the Death Eater tries to attack her, Thor stops the girl from getting thrown away. Then he advises her to choose which hits to block and which to dodge, so she doesn't get hurt. Mia remembers learning something like that from Velgar, and starts reading the dungeon boss's movements. The knight gains confidence that they can win, impressing the protagonist with her show of talent. Soon, the Death Eater gives up on attacking the girl and targets Thor instead, since he's an easier mark. But Mia doesn't let the mage get hurt, and quickly protects him with her shield. Taking the chance, the protagonist uses the distraction to slash the monster. Even after leaving the dungeon boss dazed, Mia keeps drawing its attention with her shield. The two work together to slowly tear apart the cloak, ready to finish it on the next exchange. With Mia so determined to protect him, Thor gets ready to exorcise the monster with holy magic. As soon as the Death Eater hits the knight's shield, the protagonist takes the opening to finish off the boss creature. He apologizes for making the knight work so hard, and Mia quickly makes it clear she was happy to help. It's a shame Thor's sword broke in the process, and he decides to take it home anyway. It was a weapon he picked up in the dungeon, and it could be a relic from an old adventurer killed by the Death Eater. Before the core is destroyed, they decide they're going to grab everything that looks valuable. Suddenly, the ashes of the Death Eater's soul float through the air, creating a beautiful sight. A little later, the pair safely leaves the dungeon, and Mia is amazed to see it vanish. She's happy it was her first time, especially since she got so many goods in there. Thor says they should rest a bit before heading back to the capital, and notices Reyna has already left. The mage worries he didn't get good enough results, which makes Mia notice the pained look on his face and think it was her fault. Then the knight apologizes for being so useless, embarrassed by her lack of ability and feeling like she doesn't deserve to be in the royal guard. On the other hand, the protagonist doesn't think they could have beaten the Death Eater without her. When Mia is moved by the praise, Thor notices someone is coming closer. The troops led by Velgar arrive at the mines, and everyone feels relieved to see the rookie is safe. The girl admits her own shortcomings and promises she'll try harder, but Velgar says she did enough, even though he gets the credit for destroying the dungeon core. Thor makes it clear he only helped Mia, so the knight tells Boldus that his story was different from what the newbie just said. Boldus was surprised to see the girl was still alive, and Thor remembers the guy had run off in the middle of the battle a little earlier. That comment pisses Velgar off because Boldus had accused Mia of ditching the squad during the fight, and the knight tries to explain himself, accusing her of stealing loot from the dungeon and using it to make money. But nobody believes a word. He says since the other knights told Velgar the truth a long time ago, so he uses his authority as captain to fire Boldus from the royal guard. On top of that, the knight thanks Thor for the help and bows, which makes the protagonist nervous. Velgar knows it was his responsibility as captain to deal with these problems, not someone from the mage's court. Since he was blaming himself so much, the protagonist decides to settle things by asking a favor. The mage let the guard carry the items they got in the dungeon to the guild. Thor didn't care about getting rewards or money for the job, which shocked Velgar and made Mia laugh. Deep down, the protagonist just wanted to keep a good relationship between the knights and the mages. Instead of going back to the city by carriage, he'd rather walk, and the girl came with him, hating the idea of traveling next to Boldus. Also, the female knight wanted to use the chance to ask Thor to teach her support magic. She knew the protagonist was really busy, but she wanted to get stronger. All of a sudden, Thor starts crying happy tears, more than willing to teach her. If Mia learns magic, then she'd never have to get frustrated with people being rude again. The comment makes her remember what Boldus said, and even though she wasn't offended, she decided to let it slide since Thor was so excited. Meanwhile, Luna was lost in a forest but refuses to ask for help. Later that night, Thor, Reyna, and Mia go out to eat together and unwind. This happened right after they arrived in the royal capital. The female knight invited the protagonist to dinner, using the excuse that she didn't know any good places, but Thor had only just gotten to the city too. Then Reyna suddenly showed up and decided to take them to a good restaurant. While they ate, the assistant complained about not getting to see the protagonist fight with a sword. Thor didn't want to be the main topic, so he says Mia wanted to learn support magic. At that, the female knight reveals that knights usually look down on using magic because it goes against the spirit of chivalry. Everyone at the table agrees it was stupid to call someone lazy for relying on support to get stronger. During the conversation, the protagonist feels like the vibe at the table was kind of nostalgic. After dinner, the trio walks through the streets and comes across a statue of Alan. Mia takes the chance to ask Thor what the hero was like when he was still alive. Playing it off, the protagonist says there wasn't much difference from what the legend said, but Reyna knows the mage always refused to give details about the past, especially because she doubts Alan was a good person after kicking Thor off the team. The princess didn't mean to pry into his privacy and ask, but she figures her ex-teacher must feel really guilty. The next morning, Thor received a bunch of goods in his room as a reward for defeating the Death Eater. Even though the knights took credit for clearing the dungeon, Velgar insisted the protagonist at least get some kind of reward. Even though it was a good thing, the mage didn't know what to do with that much money, and Reyna suggests making new gear with the materials. The Death Eater's cloak would be really useful if they could use it, so the two decide to go to the equipment shop. Soon, they find out they could adjust the cloak, but they couldn't forge a new sword from the dungeon boss's scythe. It was made of a special iron that humans couldn't process, and they couldn't even reach the temperature needed in the capital's forge, so the protagonist thinks that if they needed that much fire, he could help. He asks permission to go into the workshop and puts the idea he had into action. Thor was going to weaken the scythe's resistance to mana, so they could melt the iron with magical fire, and he'd seal up the forge flames to keep the heat steady. To everyone's shock, the mage managed to heat up the scythe, letting the team work on something new. The craftsman made 2 new swords thanks to the huge amount of iron, one for Thor and the other for Reyna. Even though they were mages, only the assistant was a real swordswoman, while the protagonist would keep his for self-defense. On top of that, the guy had the magic-resistant cloak, which made him even stronger. As soon as they leave the workshop, Reyna says she feels bad about getting new stuff with the Death Eater's materials, without having taken part in the fight. The protagonist wanted to reward her for always helping him, and that makes the girl laugh a little. In the end, the two decide to go out for dinner and enjoy the rest of their day off. On another day, the pair went looking for jobs to do and found out there were several available. Thor had heard Luna had been taking a bunch lately, and figured she was off now. But soon some people mentioned that the girl hasn't come back from her last mission for 3 days. The task was to investigate a huge monster in Cargo Forest, a place where it's easy to get lost. Some believe Luna might lose her temper and burn the whole place down before coming back, but the protagonist decided to find her anyway. Reyna sighs because Thor was always so kind and worried about other people. The forest was full of living creatures, and no normal human goes near it because of the monster hunt. Thor thinks it would be easy to find the missing mage if nothing got in their way. In a nearby tree, the two find a magical mark, Luna left behind. They decide to follow her trail to find her, cutting through the forest quickly with support magic. The protagonist is happy to see Reyna using what he taught her so skillfully. Eventually the traces of magic run out and they find the remains of a battlefield. The nearby trees were burned and blood marks left by the monster make another trail they decide to follow. While they investigate, the protagonist thinks the wounded monster might have called for help from its companions while it fled. In that case, the mages come to the conclusion that Luna got lost during the hunt in the middle of the dark forest. Thor can't find any footprints left behind and decides he'll find her by releasing mana. Luna was an experienced mage, so she would detect human mana and respond by asking for help. Reyna would be in charge of drawing in and taking down any monster. Attracted by the flashy power as soon as the protagonist manages to release mana, the pair runs to the edge of the forest and finds Luna. The girl freaks out when she sees them and yells asking why they're there, but the pain from her injury makes her stop complaining. Thor comes closer to see if she's hurt, and realizes the girl actually has a stomachache after eating mushrooms, so he uses magic to heal her, which leaves Luna embarrassed and grateful. Before she can ask why the two of them are there, the mage screams at something that appears in the sky. When they look up, they see dragons flying overhead. They were known as the most dangerous creatures because they turn everything into ashes. Reina asks if that was the monster Luna had been hunting before, and she says no because it was way too strong to be taken down by a single mage. The lizard the mage was chasing shows up for a surprise attack, and Reina quickly takes it down with a sword slash. The problem is it had gotten reinforcements, so the group was being pressured from all sides. Luna feels guilty for putting them in danger and tells them to run while she creates a distraction. Thor refuses, suggesting Reina handle the lizards while the other two deal with the dragons. He believes working as a team will let them win. Annoyed at being ordered around, Luna steps forward and protects Thor from the dragon's flamethrower with her magic. The girl's power was impressive, and the protagonist praises her for reacting so fast. The second wave of attacks comes, and Luna realizes she's running out of mana to keep defending them. So the protagonist strengthens the barrier with ice, which confuses Luna because fire should melt the magic. Even so, the two manage to survive, and Thor explains it was luck they were facing a young dragon. He points out the creature was gaining altitude, refining its mana for another flamethrower blast. It was impressive that it still wanted to fight so stubbornly, and the comment irritates Luna because it sounds like Thor is mocking her and comparing her to the dragon. At the same time, the mage knows the protagonist was older and more experienced, so she'd listen to the plan. Thor explains the creature's weakness was the reverse scale on its neck, so they should be able to beat it with a single hit. He also explains how they do it, and soon the dragon gets ready to attack them again. This was the chance they'd been waiting for, and Luna prepares a shield coated with water. The idea was to reduce the intensity of the fire attack and defend while Thor deals with the dragon's weak spot. The mage makes the creature slow its wing beats, forcing it down to the ground and temporarily stripping its resistance to magic. Next, Luna lands a thunder shot right on the creature's weak spot, but the monster still hadn't gone down, and Thor barely manages to shield the girl from another blast of flamethrower. Right after that, he yells at her to get ready to hit the weak spot again, trying to snap her out of shock. Meanwhile, the creature gets back up, forcing the protagonist to hold it back with magic and get Luna to stand up at the same time. Then the mage finally pulls herself together and lands a hit on the dragon. Finishing it off, Thor celebrates the win and praises the girl, which leaves her embarrassed and worried about his condition after he protected her. To Luna's surprise, he was totally fine because he'd defended himself with water magic. The girl gets annoyed that she worried for nothing, but thanks him for putting himself at risk. Even so, the protagonist has trouble hearing because the thunder left him temporarily deaf. Luna remembers getting criticized for always affecting her teammates with her light magic, and quickly heals Thor's ear. Soon, Reina walks up to the two of them, and the protagonist decides to start collecting the materials the dragon left behind. Thor asks Luna to clean whatever they collect and burn what they don't need, and the girl is confused that she didn't get scolded for her own lack of ability. At the same time, she realizes those two wouldn't say things like that, and starts helping them gather everything. When the guild group arrives to help, Thor gets called over to check something unusual they find in the dragon's body. Looking closer, they notice it looked like a magic stone, but it's actually a dungeon core. Everyone's confused by what they're seeing, so the protagonist decides they'll take the item back to headquarters and investigate. It's only at night that the trio returns to the city, exhausted from the day's work. Luna complains about how much mana she spent organizing the materials, and Thor says it's necessary because gathering materials the old-fashioned way can take forever. Just then, the mage feels pain in his leg, and the assistant offers to massage it when they get back to the room. The protagonist starts to turn down the offer, so Luna says she knows a medicinal bathhouse that helps with fatigue. She stammers out an excuse that it's not like she cares about him being tired, but she wanted to be mature and show gratitude for the help she got earlier. In the end, the group spends the night at the hot springs, resting. Even so, Thor can't stop thinking about the dungeon core he found inside the dragon. Ever since the Demon King was subdued, new dungeons have rarely appeared. Still, several have shown up near the capital with really strong monsters, which makes it seem like someone's behind it with bad intentions. That's why the protagonist wonders how he should report it to headquarters. The next day, he tells Elena everything he found out, and she decides they'll start investigating the situation. That just makes the protagonist admire her even more because having a good leader makes a huge difference. More than anything, Thor feels good having a superior who trusts him. Reina shows up to say good morning to the protagonist, and he takes the chance to tell her about his report to Elena. The mage praises her a lot for being proactive and having the qualities to be a queen, which really moves Reina. A little later, the two of them head over to the mission board to pick up a job. Meanwhile, Luna decides to head off and rest after spending so much mana to defeat the dragon. So Thor goes with the mission to investigate. Screams people have been hearing from the capital's sewers. If someone's trying to create dungeons, the sewers under the city would be perfect for it. On top of that, the underground was huge like a maze, which kept the knights from finding where the screams they heard from the sewers were coming from. Even so, the protagonist wants to make sure people are safe and worries about monsters showing up. Using magical sight, Reina can't sense any abnormal mana nearby. The place also seems really clean and empty, especially since it's always kept clean. In that case, unless the monsters are pretty smart, they wouldn't be able to find them. Then Thor says they've been followed for a while and they should see who it is. It doesn't seem like Mia because the mana is way too strong and they can't see them because they're using a magical invisibility tool. So the two decide to keep walking and ignore the stalker, since they don't seem hostile. After a long walk, they don't find anything suspicious around the area. All of a sudden, the light of a torch appears behind them, down the corridor as another group approaches. It was Mia, and she was with other female knights while doing an inspection underground. On the way, they run into Thor, and Mia freaks out when she suddenly sees him. As a result, the protagonist takes a free punch, forcing the girl to apologize. Even though the protagonist doesn't mind, he's impressed by how fast she reacted. The two groups realize they're after the same thing and decide to team up for the investigation. On the knight's map, Reina points out there's a small hidden room that wasn't on the mage's map. They decide to go check it out. Finding a place with no dust but pretty damp, using magical sight, Thor finds traces of mana and moves closer to the back wall. Soon he finds a lock, and Reina notices it's something that can only be opened with a magical tool. At that moment, the protagonist decides he'll force it open. Since looking for a key would take too long to everyone's shock, he actually manages to open the passage by cutting off the mechanism's mana supply. They come across another staircase and a horrible smell is coming from it. When they go down, they find an arena and several cells with all kinds of monsters locked up. Reina figures it's a place where they run illegal bets by making humans fight. Suddenly, some voices ask how they even got down there. The men panic when they realize they're knights and get ready to lock the passages and open the cages. It doesn't take long for the group to be surrounded by a huge number of creatures, but Mia stays calm because she trusts Thor. The protagonist realizes he can't let those expectations down and decides to handle support like he always does. Meanwhile, the rest of the team is going to take down each of the monsters. Reina wants to show Thor the results of her training, and the other knight girls are impressed by how easily they can fight with the protagonist backing them up. Before long, they manage to defeat all the monsters, worrying the bandits, who start to run. But before they can get away, someone uses magic to paralyze them. That person is Luna, who complains that the others got there before her in the investigation. The protagonist worries because he always sees her working alone, and the mage complains because she can handle herself just fine. A little later, the capital's guards come down underground to inspect the place. Thor says running an arena that big isn't something just anyone could pull off. The captured bandits recognize the knights the moment they saw them arrive, so someone inside the palace must be involved. Suddenly, the protagonist feels something strange coming from inside one of the cells. He goes over to check, and at first he can't see anything with magical sight, until a terrifying voice praises him for sensing its presence. Thor yells for everyone to get ready for another fight, and a new creature emerges from the darkness. The monster gets irritated at being called a lich, introducing himself as Regals, one of the Demon King's subordinates. Thor is a little startled, so Reina steps forward to taunt the creature because she wants revenge. Regals flies into a rage at hearing such blasphemy against Gizbar, mourning his death and getting ready to sacrifice the capital's humans to bring him back. Suddenly, the monster's corpses start to rise, turning into zombies. Reina realizes the situation is awful and wonders what Thor is feeling now, hearing about the Demon King again. She worries about the protagonist, but the mage thanks her for caring. Instead, he gets ready to crush the dreams of anyone who wants to revive Gizbar. While Regals realizes he's facing the one who defeated his superior, Reina asks the night girls to help her neutralize the zombies. Necromancy is a kind of magic that takes a lot of mana, but if they could destroy more than half of a zombie, then it wouldn't get back up anymore. The plan is for the night girls to distract the weaker ones while Thor finishes off the others. Even so, Regals has no intention of standing still and prepares a fireball to wipe everyone out at once. Mia cries out, worried about the protagonist, but he easily smothers the enemy's attack with water. The mage mocks the lich's anger over wanting revenge and insults Gizbar, making Regals even angrier. So the monster prepares several attacks at once, and Thor blocks them all without any trouble. The night girls are amazed at how strong the mage is, and Reina explains it's just basic elemental magic. Even so, Thor is an exception in how good he is at balancing technique and power, something the assistant admires. The protagonist keeps provoking Regals to make him use everything he's been holding back, and the monster decides to reveal his true strength. Just like Thor expects, the opponent is running out of mana with every spell. He gets worn down by the cheap taunts and frustrated by the mage's defenses. Soon the zombies stop moving when the lich cancels the necromancy to defend himself from Thor's attack. Regals is furious that he realized the enemy's plan too late, unable to defend against the protagonist's final blow, or that's what should have happened. But a third person's magic finishes the lich before him, and everyone wonders who did it. When they look up, they realize it was Luna who finished the monster before Thor, making Reina furious because she stole his credit. Before the group starts collecting the materials the monsters left behind, the mage goes over to Regals and finds something that worries him. There was a dungeon core inside him too, confirming a connection between the arena and the recent weird activity. Even so, Thor would never allow the Demon King to be revived. Later, Luna begs the protagonist for forgiveness for killing Regals, and Reina stays mad at her for being so reckless. In the end, the investigation group decides to go to the hot springs to relax and have dinner. During the conversation, Mia's classmates say they're interested in support magic, which makes Thor happy. Meanwhile, somewhere far from the Empire, the real commander of the Knights was returning to headquarters. As time passed, Thor's students kept training their use of support magic. Reina helped them out, explaining how to improve and being especially strict with Luna. The protagonist shows up to class a little later, surprised to see everyone gathered so early. Mia says she can use acceleration on her own now, and Thor praises her for it. Luna says she learned how to use magic vision too, with Reina teasing her for being slow to improve. That just makes Luna cling to Thor, complaining that Reina was way too strict. It only annoys the assistant, which makes Mia ask everyone to calm down. With that, Thor pulls away from Luna's touch, making it clear Reyna wasn't strict for no reason. Trying to lighten the mood, he shows he brought snacks for everyone, and suggests taking a break. Reyna is touched because the protagonist remembered her favorite flavor, and she's in a good mood because Thor is so kind. The girl wonders if she's special to her teacher, not being childish like Luna. After the students eat and relax, Thor, Reyna, and Luna go out for a walk around the capital. They notice the place is really crowded, which is pretty rare. Luna complains they're out of work and Reyna teases her to leave because she wants to be alone with Thor. The two keep arguing until suddenly a crowd celebrating something grabs their attention. When they get closer, they realize they're welcoming Arno, the captain of the guard. The year before, he defeated the old leader and took the position, getting lots of praise from the emperor. Reyna says Arno is really popular with the young women in the capital, which frustrates Luna since she's just another fan. She even says she's only interested in someone who's better than her at magic, but Thor ignores her and points to the captain of the guard arriving. All of a sudden, the protagonist locks eyes with Arno, and in that moment the captain jumps off his own horse and runs toward him. He drops to his knees, overjoyed to see his old teacher again, causing a big scene. Thor is shocked because he never imagined the former delinquent would turn into such an amazing man. One of the knights asks Arno to come with him to the palace, since the conversation was spreading pointless gossip, so the captain decides to leave, asking the protagonist to meet him at headquarters later. Thor tells the girls he used to teach him magic, but he didn't know his last name, so he didn't recognize him. The three decide to step away from the crowd to talk in private. Reyna always thought it was weird that the captain used magic, but it made sense since they went to the same school. There was an old rule in the royal guard that banned using magic in fights because it neglected physical training. Even today, there are people who prefer the old-school knight style and follow the old rule to the letter. On the other hand, Arno was the total opposite, and he was the target of a lot of envy and resentment. Hearing that makes Thor want to help him. After all, he was his old teacher and the two girls agree. The protagonist decides to go on ahead to meet the captain, asking Reyna and Luna not to fight too much while he's gone. When he arrives at headquarters, Arno begs Thor to become the knight's magic instructor. He argues that the guard needs to get as strong as possible, and having a good mage would be essential. Thor gets tense from all the praise and expectations, and soon Velgar shows up to back the idea. He mentions the protagonist is a good teacher too, making the other knights curious. To the protagonist's surprise, Velgar was another one of Arno's fans. Before Thor can argue against it, someone else protests against having a magic instructor. The knight named Edmund refuses to work with the mage's court. Arno understands how determined he is, but he's so harsh it makes the protagonist remember when he was a delinquent. Even Mia, who wanted to support Thor, gets scared to get involved in the argument. 10 years earlier, when the heroes group faced Gizbar, the knights struggled to beat the monsters and took heavy losses. Even so, Edmund was the former captain's son, and refuses to accept using magic, calling for a vote to decide what to do. Arno fires back that they should settle it in a duel, like tradition says. The opposing group refuses, suspecting the captain broke the rules by using magic to beat Edmund's father. Velgar scolds them because the duel was witnessed by the emperor, so that was a huge show of disrespect. Arno can't believe Edmund wants to remove him from the position right after he cleared an S-rank dungeon. The captain is responsible for keeping everyone safe, and he points to the wounded knights who came back from the expedition. He'd do anything to keep everyone alive, and he didn't need to be the leader to do that. Even thinking differently, Arno wants the guard to be even stronger, and would take on anyone who was against that idea. Thor feels like things are about to get ugly, so he asks Edmund what his goal is in firing the current captain. The kid wanted his father Gustav to get the post back, furious that some mere mage is giving opinions about the knights. This time, Arno gets annoyed that they're treating his old teacher badly, and the protagonist uses magic to stop a fight. He scolds both of them for losing their heads when they could talk like adults and work it out. Then he suggests a dungeon clearing competition to settle the issue. Whoever destroys the core first wins, and the members are free to fight each other if they want. Velgar suggests using a mine known as the Golem Dungeon, which is in its active period. Active period dungeons can be cleared multiple times before they respawn after a while. Even though it's useful for training, it's hard to clear because it's rank A. In that case, both sides agree to join the competition and settle the score. Edmund would take a small group from his own faction, and Arno decides he'd go alone alongside Thor. The protagonist is surprised to be dragged into this mess, and feels annoyed. Arno is confident in his own strength and promises he won't get in the way, basically pulling Thor onto his side. Meanwhile, Edmund was eager to make those two regret getting in his way. Time passes, and the teams gather at the abandoned mines. Velgar explains the rules and checks that both competitors agree to them. Thor is impressed that Edmund's team has several high-ranking mages, but gets distracted when Reyna calls him. The girls showed up to cheer for him right before Velgar starts the competition. Immediately, Thor and Arno rush into the dungeon with support magic. Edmund is startled by their speed, and a knight says they'll run out of mana pretty fast. Meanwhile, the protagonist and his student take on the golems inside the dungeon with ease. Thor tells Arno to stay on guard, and Arno laughs, remembering he's the knight's captain now. Even after getting scolded, he's happy because his teacher's skills are still incredible. The protagonist is touched by the praise, mentioning that the speech Arno gave the other day was great too. Arno gets a little embarrassed by the comment, and soon Thor warns that more enemies are coming. The pair realize they're golems with weapon-shaped body parts, and they get ready to fight. Outside the dungeon, Reyna and the female knights admire the duo's techniques. At the same time, Velgar is surprised by the magic tool Reyna brought to broadcast what's happening in the dungeon. Some knights are shocked to see Arno taking down golems so easily, and Velgar says it's thanks to Thor's magic. When the captain and Velgar fought together before, they had trouble bringing those creatures down, even splitting the work. Luna agrees. After all, each golem's core is in a different place. Because of that, you had to destroy multiple spots to find the weak point. They all had resistances and solid defenses too, so they could be a pain to take down. Even if it doesn't look like it, Thor is a monster at controlling magic, and Luna gives him credit for that. The protagonist's job was so hard that even court mages would call him a genius. And Reyna feels proud seeing everyone recognize her teacher. Velgar says he's fallen for Thor and wants him, making everyone stare at him in shock. Mia asks what that means, and the knight explains he wants to bring him in as a tutor for the team. Meanwhile, Edmund decides to split the knights from the mages to handle the search work in the dungeon. Luna doesn't get why he made that call and worries because she doesn't know any of the mages on the other team. So Reyna says none of those people were real mages, and even Velgar gets curious about what she means. Meanwhile, Arno says they were getting close to the end of the dungeon and thinks it's weird. No strong monster has shown up yet. Luna says the biggest problem might be the environment instead of an enemy itself. He expected Edmund to be more aggressive in the competition, but he was surprised because he still hadn't run into anyone from the other team so far. Right as they're talking about that, an armored golem shows up to stop them, and the pair gets ready for the final fight. It was an opponent that could resist magic and physical attacks, and Thor asks how they're supposed to beat it. Arno says the creature's core is in its chest and that they could win in 10 minutes. As soon as the golem attacks, the protagonist tells the student to distract it for a while. Meanwhile, Thor notices the golem had magical armor that wouldn't melt easily. Luna and Reyna are impressed by how fast Arno fights with a spear, and Velgar explains that his fighting style was about balancing mobility and strength. With the protagonist's support magic added in, the captain became unbeatable. On the other hand, Thor and Reyna realize the golem was bigger than normal for the dungeon it was in. As the monster lifts its leg while being lured by Arno, the protagonist takes the chance to make it float. Even though it's really heavy, Thor holds it in place and uses magic vision to locate the creature's core. That way, the captain hits the golem's weak point with his spear, but can't pierce through, so the mage increases the weight of his weapon to boost the attack, finishing the monster off. The protagonist takes the chance to praise his former student for finishing the battle in under 3 minutes. Now the pair could focus on destroying the dungeon's heart and head to the back of the area. A little later, the two get kicked out of the dungeon and Arno practically crushes Thor with his heavy armor. Putting that aside, the protagonist says they should sort out the materials they got. At the same time, they talk about how weird it was that they still hadn't run into Edmund and his team yet. Right in the middle of the conversation, a stranger shows up that the protagonist immediately recognizes as one of the mages from the opposing team. The man explains he ditched Edmund after getting fed up with the leader's decisions, so he wanted to help the pair. It doesn't take long for Arno to point out that the stranger was actually a hired assassin. The reveal shocks Thor, and the assassin decides to drop the disguise and shows what he really looks like. He says his job was to take Arno's life as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the viewers are furious when they see what's happening. Velgar announces the duel is invalid and they should pull the competitors out of the dungeon right now. But Reyna argues the captain wouldn't lose with Thor by his side. Luna agrees with the idea, impressing Velgar with how much confidence they had in the protagonist. In the meantime, Arno tells the mage to back off, but Thor refuses. After all, now that he knew one of his students' lives was in danger, he couldn't back down. Even the assassin gets scared by the aura coming off the mage, and he knows he'd lose if he fought Arno one-on-one. The captain quickly realizes the opponent was trying to lure him into an open area. The intentions were pretty obvious since the assassin had backup to help him get the job done. Thor worries they might have trouble beating that many people, but Arno stays calm. Even if they all attack together, it'd be the perfect chance to wipe out the group in one go. In that case, Arno would fight the group while Thor took down the assassin's boss. Everyone keeps being impressed by how fast the captain takes the lead in battles. Even Reyna notices how good the spearman is at support magic. Even though he uses simple spells, keeping them up for that long proves his skill. It would be enough to show the other knights that using magic is actually really useful. While Arno wipes the floor with the opponents, Thor worries about what he should do now. The mage tries to pin the assassin down, but his spell gets broken quickly because of the opponent's magic resistance. After powering himself up, Thor uses the sword he got recently to attack the assassin. The man is shocked when he realizes the mage is using Demon King Iron, and asks how that's even possible. So the protagonist explains he gave up swordsmanship a long time ago to focus on magic. The mage's honesty makes the assassin recognize him, and he introduces himself as Kalman. Thor is confused by the friendly reaction, but realizes Kalman was getting ready to use something. That's why the main guy is quicker to destroy the opponent's trump card, smacking him in the face with the sword's hilt. Seeing his teacher beat Kalman, Arno claps, and Thor lets out a tired sigh. Suddenly, Edmund shows up saying he came to help after hearing Arno was in trouble. But when he realizes everyone's already been defeated, he gets frustrated that his plan didn't work out. Then the knight suggests taking down the captain, now that he's tired after fighting the assassins. Edmund agrees with the idea, and Arno jumps into the fight, dragging Thor into the middle of that mess. At the end of the competition, the Emperor declared Edmund disqualified and is surprised to see Velgar had something to say about it. Velgar says the riot started because of a personal grudge and asks Heinrich to show Edmund mercy. After thinking it over, the Emperor agrees to the request and dismisses them. To celebrate winning the competition, Thor and Arno went out drinking with other people. The main guy finds out Velgar defended Edmund because they couldn't afford to lose his family's influence. Even though Arno isn't happy about it, the important thing was making sure they could defend the royal capital when needed. Then he brings up rumors that someone's trying to revive the Demon King, and Reina remembers the hidden arena investigation is over. They found out Gibald's father was involved, and a group punishment would be unavoidable. Things were getting worse, and the main guy worries there might be more collaborators. Instead of talking about that, Thor says he's not sure he's good enough as a magic tutor. At that, all his students protest, making it clear they admired him and learned a lot from him. Velgar agrees, praising Thor's tactical experience, while Luna gets annoyed at how humble the mage was. The group spends a good while talking the main guy up, leaving him embarrassed but grateful. At the end of dinner, everyone walks through the streets at night to unwind. Then Arno takes the chance to ask what Thor thinks about Reina. The mage says she's pretty, kind and strong, but he only sees her as a good student. More than anything, Thor wanted to see her happy. Hearing that, Reina decides to accept things the way they are, at least for now. Soon the rest of the group says goodbye, leaving the two mages behind. The main guy says they should head back to the palace too, but ends up passing out from sleepiness. He has the same dream about the day they faced the Demon King. Thor ran out of mana while trying to protect his companions with a magic shield. Rather than let his companions get hurt, he decided to give everything he had to protect them. After all, everyone there was an important hero with superhuman talents who would make a difference. Meanwhile, Thor was just some ordinary mage who could be replaced. Even though death scared him, at least he'd be sacrificing himself with pride. Right when he thought that, mana returned to his body, and it took Thor a moment to understand why. When he least expected it, Alan dropped his own shield and put himself in danger for everyone else. In that moment, the main guy screamed the hero's name in desperation, and was shocked to see the Demon King's attack vanish. That impossible event was called the hero's miracle. Gizbar's defeat made the team celebrate, thinking they'd won without losing anyone, or so they hoped, because soon Thor found out only what was left of Alan had been left behind. As the price for defeating humanity's greatest enemy, the world lost its greatest hero. The imperial capital received the survivors without congratulating them, terrified to see how each of them was drowning in despair. Ever since then, Thor never climbed out of that pit of insecurity and fear. As soon as the main guy wakes up, and he realizes he'd been sleeping with his head in Reina's lap. The mage apologizes, and the assistant says it's fine, more worried about the nightmare he seemed to have had. She even jokes that Thor proposed to her in his sleep, covering up the fact she saw him calling out for Alan. Reina knew the hero's death left a painful wound in his heart, and that's why she wanted to help him. Thor is surprised to see it's already dawn, and decides it's time to head back to the palace. 10 years after Alan's death, the main guy still couldn't understand him. The hero's companions found a diary written by Alan, where he regretted how weak the team was. Because of that, Alan decided he would kick Thor off the team after Gizbar's defeat. Ever since then, the main guy kept wondering why, and never found the answer within himself. Suddenly, Reina points at the beautiful sky, pulling him away from his dark thoughts. The mage looks at the girl and agrees, saying he'd gotten lost thinking about something. He couldn't understand why Reina would go so far to help him. The assistant answers that it's because she loved him, and even though Thor knew that, he wanted to know how it was at the start when they first met. So the girl explains, she saw him as someone special because he helped her whenever she needed it. Reina learned a lot and was only able to smile now thanks to Thor. Since the day the protagonist came back after Gizbar's defeat, something inside him was lost. Now, she wanted to support him just as much as she'd been helped before. Losing companions because of his own weakness was a pain. Thor would never be able to forget, that's why he didn't want to let others suffer through that despair. The protagonist thanks Reina because now he knew what he wanted for the future while stopping the Demon King's rebirth. Meanwhile, on Mount Eld, a group of demons heard about the Golem dungeon being conquered. Realizing their plans had been found out, they decide they'd hurry to bring Gizbar back at any cost. Over the next few days, the protagonist's students keep training magic. Velgar gets sad that he can't keep up with the others, and Thor advises him not to take everything so seriously. Instead of forcing his body, they should do things slowly and blend magic into Velgar's style. The knight was already really skilled, so he just needed something to complement that. Thor gives examples of tough situations where just using a weapon to win wasn't enough. In those moments, they'd need to adapt so they could avoid losses on the battlefield. Meanwhile, Mia was impressing the others by making a fireball. Luna says it was something that girl did naturally. After all, she'd started training before everyone else, and she worked really hard. Thor agrees, explaining that increasing mana was a slow process, and they had to be patient. It doesn't take long for training to come to an end, and all the knights thank the new magic tutors for the help. Luna scolds the protagonist for getting intimidated by those people's gratitude, annoyed at how humble he was. Then Thor says he'd never had this many students before, and was surprised that support magic was the least popular. At that, Mia comes over and says it was because it was the hardest to train compared to the others. Everyone else agrees, leaving Thor discouraged about the situation. Luna comments that Reina and Arno were probably just unusual for learning so fast. Right then, Arno shows up to praise the classes, unintentionally hurting Thor by reinforcing that support magic was hard to learn. He feels bad for always relying on his old teacher, but he wanted to ask for something too. Soon, Thor ends up being sent on a mission to Mount Eld. That was the place where Gizbar's forces once made magical weapons. After the war, the Empire's army took the place, but they were defeated that morning. It was a secret only an elite group knew to avoid public chaos. If Arno handled the problem, it would draw too much attention, so he sent Thor. So the mage decided to take a few trusted knights to help him. Velgar tells the rookies to take this mission seriously, and Thor takes the chance to thank him for coming along. Luna complains about being ignored, and the protagonist says he's happy to have her there too. Then Mia comments on how rare it was not to have Reyna near Thor. At that, Luna says the assistant must be busy helping the princess or something like that. But even Thor hadn't heard anything about it, and he gets worried that the mage is avoiding him. Suddenly, Velgar draws everyone's attention to the fortress coming up ahead. The place was way up high so they could see winged monsters nearby. Apparently, the army was under attack from the south and the Emperor's forces pushed in from the north. Thor didn't know the details, but apparently it was a group of strong adventurers. In the end, everyone realizes the protagonist's fear was about to become reality. Even so, Thor was ready to stop the Demon Lord's resurrection and protect everyone. Velgar is impressed by how much the mage had a dangerous aura when he got serious. Soon, Luna smacks the protagonist on the back to remind him not to put himself at risk alone. That makes Thor remember he'd heard something similar from an old friend, and he calms down a bit. Later, the group reaches the Emperor's army and Thor explains they came to help. Since the fortress was taken by demons, the protagonist figures they aren't smart enough to use the terrain well, so everyone agrees to solve the situation by attacking head-on. Thor is happy to have such good students with him, and says he'll stay on support like always. The front line was made up of Thor and Mia, where the mage would remove the allies' fatigue and defend them whenever possible. The second line would have Luna on the offensive, with 2 female knights protecting her. In the end, Velgar would guard the group's back right as the battle starts. Thor asks Luna to focus on taking down the archers and mages without finishing them off, which leaves the mage confused. Then, one of the female knights explains that the enemies would eventually give in from exhaustion, so Luna decides to wipe them all out at once using a huge spell. Meanwhile, the others would keep defending her and give as much support as possible. The girl's spell creates a massive explosion in the area, and everyone protects themselves inside Thor's barrier. Even the Empire's knights are shocked when they see the light on the horizon. All the enemies were swept out of the area by Luna's brutal attack. Now that they dealt with this problem, they headed to the other areas that were under attack. They soon run into 3 demons approaching, and get ready for battle. Thor organizes the team again and decides he'll handle the opponent right in the middle. Seeing him fight alone annoys Luna, but she couldn't go against orders and help him, so the team splits up to start fighting. The demons use shadow magic, so the shields are reinforced with holy power. That way they can take the demons' hits while Luna uses new spells. Meanwhile, the demon Thor chose to go after starts laughing in his face. Realizing the creature was preparing an attack, the protagonist closes in faster. The demon panics and fires magic bullets, and Thor easily dodges every single one. The creature knows it's facing a human who's not normal, and starts getting excited. But before it can attack again, the mage catches it off guard with a holy light spell. To the protagonist, the demon was way too slow to do anything, so it was defeated. The mage cuts down his enemy with his sword, making it vanish. Meanwhile, the others' teamwork was working well, so they managed to defeat the other demons. One of them even mentions the name Jilvis before dying, but none of the knights notice. Instead, everyone celebrates the win with no casualties or injuries. Even so, the mission isn't over, and Thor reminds them they still have to break into the enemy base. As expected, they don't run into any other enemies on the way to the fortress, but everyone ends up shocked when they find the remains of an old battlefield. The smell of blood and death was way too strong, and it came from all kinds of monsters. Suddenly, a demon comes flying in after taking a fatal slash from the strongest human in the Empire. The group freezes in surprise, wondering who that person was. Then they realize a swordswoman appears, and the girls are impressed by her beauty. Thor quickly recognizes her as Lena, and the others remember who she is too. The swordswoman cleared 30 S-rank dungeons, defeated hundreds of monsters alone, and was admired by everyone in the royal guard. To absolutely no one's surprise, Lena was also one of Thor's former students. After they explain the situation, Velgar asks the woman to leave command in the protagonist's hands. Lena and Thor end up acting like they don't know each other. The mage missed his chance to greet her properly, so things between them got awkward. Anyway, Lena says she's fine with following orders and asks what they're doing now. Right at that moment, enemy reinforcements arrive with an army of demons. The sight catches everyone off guard, and Thor knows it can only mean one thing. They were probably doing a ritual to summon a powerful demon inside the fortress. The problem is that it would take a lot of human sacrifices, and Thor decides to fight them alone. Luna complains about that decision, but the protagonist makes it clear he can handle it. Meanwhile, the others would destroy the ritual altars to calm the team down. Lena decides to stay behind too, but Luna asks Thor to be careful. The mage agrees, asking the same of the others. Soon, a demon approaches, saying it's impressed that humans made it that far. But the protagonist doesn't care about the villain's speech, and decides to get straight to the beating. In just a few seconds, a bunch of the monsters are taken down by Lena's sword. As they clear a path, the rest of the team runs through to storm the fortress. One of the demons realizes what the humans are trying to do, and decides to use its own life as a sacrifice. Even though the protagonist tries to take down as many enemies as possible, several of them become part of the ritual. Before that, Velgar warns everyone not to breathe in the magic fog because it's toxic. Miasma, at that moment, Thor realizes they got there too late to stop the summoning. Seeing the size of that ritual, it was impossible for an S-class demon king to show up. Instead of that, a shadow dragon would probably show up. Thor and Lena stand side by side, getting ready to fight. The protagonist doesn't think he can beat the dragon and protect everyone at the same time, but staying on the defensive could be even more dangerous, so he decides they'll alternate between attacking and running. Even though the mage wants to keep up with the swordswoman's moves, she's surprised by the decision. The protagonist mentions he was being formal because he thought Lena didn't remember him. That annoys the swordswoman. There was no way she could forget her old teacher. Right then, the dragon attacks, and the mage blocks it with a holy shield. Lena comments on how Thor hasn't changed at all since they last saw each other 10 years ago. Even so, the swordswoman was happy to see her teacher remembered her. That should have been obvious after all. She was the protagonist's first student. The whole cute moment makes Lena hide how happy she is, focusing on the battle again. For a second, Thor is surprised because the way she spoke sounded a lot like Reyna, but what shocks him most is finding out his student still